According to the agenda, what we want to do is give you a sort of quick introduction to Einavar, and I should start with an introduction from the two of us. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Einavar, and one of the founders of the company, and Charles has been working with us now for, what, 7 years, Charles?
Yeah.
Something like that, and is in charge of our business development side. So fundamentally, what we've got, if you like, on the call is a combination of the ability to answer any sort of commercial questions that might come up, but equally any technical questions about, what we're doing and why we're doing it and so on. So hopefully you'll find that able to answer any questions you've got. Clearly, if we don't have the answers, then we'll go away and find them for you
Okay.
and come back to you, as it were, after the call.
And are you familiar with the Academic Health Science Network then across the country?
Well, I wouldn't say we're familiar, but you are now the third AHSN that we've actually connected to. And we probably should just very quickly walk you back a little in terms of history, just so you understand how we come to be talking to you. We've individually, both Charles and I have had experience of working alongside the NHS, but in other organisations doing other things, things like software and business intelligence and so on, working within the NHS, primarily the sort of hospital end as opposed to the primary care GP ends. But when we first sort of started looking at the product, which we'll talk about called To Go, our initial intention on this was to actually pursue what we consider to be the sort of heavy commercial users of business intelligence initially. So it's anybody using dashboards and reporting and things of this nature. And that led us quite quickly into finding our first client for the solution, which happened to be the Met Police in London. So that gave us a warm, rosy feeling about our security capability, because they clearly needed it to be very, very secure, because it turned out that what they wanted to use it for was to look at crime information as it occurred, as it were, real-time crime information within each of the London boroughs, and the users of this information were basically the borough commanders, who could then respond by, if there was a increase in car thefts, they could actually put more people into cars to go and actually, try and resist that. If there was an increase in street muggings, they take them out the cars and put them on the streets in order to patrol and so on. So it's that sort of reactive policing that they were interested in. Anyway, I won't spend too much on that, but it was simply, that was our very first one. But our next one, for example, was Orange Business Systems, the France Telecom, Orange Communications guys in Switzerland, wanting to do performance information on dashboards about how well they were doing for a major client of theirs, which happened to be a tobacco company. So over the time, what we've actually done is we've picked up quite a number of clients, but no what you might call defining thread to them. So the only common problem they all have is they all have lots of data, and they all have a problem of how to actually use it in a mobile sort of environment.
Yes.
And then I think it was Charles who first actually found us a good connection inside the NHS, which is a guy you may know called Sam Shah, who was heading up NHSX. And we went and had a meeting with Sam and his colleagues, and they were very positive, very helpful. And we spent, if I'm honest, probably quite a long time, probably a year or so, talking through with NHSX over where this might be most beneficial. And eventually, because of the sort of changes in NHSX and NHS innovation generally, we ended up in a meeting with a lady whose name escapes me, but Charles will know who it is, who basically works alongside a guy called Hugh Hathaway inside NHSX. And the outcome of that was to say, you need to go and talk to the AHSNs. And if I am honest, at that point, we had no idea that the AHSNs existed.
Well, I'd already set us up to actually go to that event, David.
Well, yes, that was subsequent. We had, this is a prior meeting I was talking about, but it so happened that Charles had booked us to go to an event being run by Eastern. Right. And so we went off to Eastern AHSN and sat through a very, very interesting presentation by Eastern AHSN. And as a direct result of that, I'm now communicating with Louise Joplin at Eastern, who I suspect might be doing a similar role to the one you do, but we'll come to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But a very positive outcome of that is that I am meeting on Friday with Mike Bone from West Suffolk NHS Trust, who's one of the GDEs. To talk about in more detail how to go would work inside West Suffolk, and the process within their sort of hospital group. Sitting at my table at this presentation was Nigel Harris from West of England AHSN, and then subsequently Charles has met, because they both happen to be in Bristol, Charles has met with Nigel, and perhaps you just want to quickly comment about that meeting, Charles.
Yeah, there's Nigel Walker and Alex Leach. Mm-hmm. So that was not too far from where I live, actually, so it was great to go down there. So I did very much what you're going to see in a minute about the to-go no-code mobile proposition, and very quickly they saw the value of it. And the upshot of it is that they said, well, we're very interested to take this further, but what we need to do is to get this document filled out, which is the one that's shared out with all of the AHSNs. It's the company engagement form. Mm-hmm. So they were suggesting that they offered to basically help and mentor us about the content that we would actually put into changing our content or upgrading our content, making it much more healthcare NHS specific, about how it add value into the NHS. And they would help to mentor us on that content. So we're in the throes of actually doing that as we speak, to be able to deliver that content back. So I'm sure that at some stage we can then pass that company engagement form on to yourself. Okay. I'm sure David will be updating us on the content for that. It just means that we can take our commercial content and presentations and all our collateral and put it into NHS speak. So we just need a little bit of guidance on that. So we think we know what we want to say and how to say it. It's just really sharpen it up to make sure that it really hits the salient points, so that we can actually help to build a end user business case of how we add value, and that's really where we want to get to.
So you via sort of your conversations to date with the HSNs then, so essentially that they're helping you to shape and articulate your value proposition for your product, but tailored to an NHS market.
Yes, exactly that. For example, if I pick up on the conversation I had with Louise, we were talking about being able to quantify what we potentially see as being significant time savings within the NHS through the use of to-go, and we were talking about, well, how do we quantify that? How do we actually measure how much time is spent at the moment to determine how much time will be saved by taking this approach, and how much does that equate to in terms of economy in terms of the saving, if you like, to the NHS. And that's the bit that's missing at the moment from our understanding and our presentation, if you like. We can happily talk commercial businesses, but clearly the NHS is unique, and we're still sort of working our way through to actually try and establish, where we need to amend the messaging in order to fit in with the NHS, as Charles was saying. And how we come to be talking to Yorkshire is, in essence, exactly the same thing. Lisa, it was her Christian name, I can't remember her surname at the moment, the lady in NHS X, suggested that Yorkshire and Humber was one of those AHSNs that we should try and connect to as being, you know, one of the sort of more progressive AHSNs that's actually potentially got people out there that they work with that can actually help us to move forward.
Okay, was that Lisa Holland?
Yeah,
Lisa Holland,
yeah.
exactly. Couldn't remember her surname. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Hugh Hathaway at NHS.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lisa was very, very positive about this. She thought this was really a great idea, and that we definitely should try and you know, strongly to get the AHSNs on our side, and through them to basically get some test studies done and get some econometric studies in place, which I think Louise is potentially going off to try and organise for me, in order that we can actually round out the messaging, if you like, as far as what we're doing. So what you're going to see now is sort of halfway. In other words, it's not where we were at the time when I was meeting with Lisa. It's got some move towards NHS speak, but it isn't where we feel we need to be.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, so that's really helpful to understand the sort of the evolution of where you're up to in the conversations that you've had, so that I can sort of contextualize it. And I think that's exactly right. I'd mirror obviously what I think AHSN colleagues have said around that if you're going to present this product to, or this solution to, be that an NHS commissioner or an NHS procurement lead or a chief information officer of a large acute hospital, there are certain things that they'll be looking for, in addition to the functionality and what the product can do. It is talking at it in the language of the NHS, very much in terms of how it can improve productivity, efficiency, the impact upon the workforce, the level of clinical engagement and buy-in that will be needed at the beginning, and obviously then the return on investment across, you know, various different levels really, and also that they're interested in as well around the, you know, the experience of using it. So from a clinician's point of view or from a managerial point of view, you know, how does it look and feel to actually be utilising that technology in a real world sort of clinical setting? So yes, it's very much framing the potential of the solution in those terms.
Yeah, so we understand that, and I think, you know, quite clearly those are some of the things we need to work upon. I mean, I think the great news, as you'll see in a minute, is that actually the answer to the last one, which is, you know, what does it look like, how do you work with it, is in essence it's the same as you would be working if you were actually on the ward desktop. So fundamentally, anything you can actually do, you know, in a static environment, you'll basically be able to do through this technology on a mobile device. And you won't need to learn how to do that, because effectively you will already know how to do that. It's sort of very intuitive user interface, and effectively, as you'll see in a second, the approach that we've taken to how to create that mobile usage means that actually we get a series of benefits along the way. So perhaps if I could actually ask you again a little bit more detail what your role is within the AHSN and where you fit, if you like, in terms of Neville and the rest of the team.
Yes, so obviously you know that there's 15 AHSNs across England, so we are a network of networks, if you like.
Yep.
So we work together nationally. We all have some national programs that we all deliver on behalf of the Centre NHS, i.e. NHS England and NHS Improvement and the Office of Life Sciences. So we're all commissioned nationally to run programs which are themes across the country. So that's things like cardiovascular, mental health, etc., etc. And then, but we all are our own sort of independent organisations too. So we all are slightly restructured and we run differently. So there is variation amongst us. Some AHSNs have a more sort of a bigger program around certain aspects, be that digital or be that med tech or whatever it is. Within Yorkshire and Humber, we have our Director of Enterprise and Innovation, who's Dr. Neville Young. I don't know if you've ever had a chat with Nev at all.
No, we've been corresponding, which is why we're basically on the call now. It trickled down from Neville. Yeah.
That's right. So Nev's the Enterprise and Innovation Director, which is essentially the commercial director.
Yeah.
Nev's team, we are really the sort of the front door for inquiries from companies such as yourself, who have either in a very early stage product which they want to develop and test, or a more mature solution that may have been utilised effectively in a different part of the country. Now they want to spread it up into Yorkshire. Yeah. So we primarily focus on that. We also have the digital portfolio, and we work with large industry as well. So we're responsible for sort of strategic partnerships with larger industry. In terms of how that works, then, so we've got Nev as the director, and then Nev's got myself and also my colleague Kate Young. So we're both the senior program leads that sort of sit under Nev. And then under there, we've got a team of program managers and digital navigators and industry engagement officers who. So we all together make up Nev's commercial team.
Right, and understand that entirely. And I think one of the challenges I think we face, being very direct, Helen, is the innovation we're talking about trying to bring to the NHS is not structured around any of your clinical needs. So it's not that we're coming with an amazing new diabetes solution or an amazing new sort of mental health solution, things like that. I mean, part of the challenge, I think, is that we've got the boring bit. We've actually got the admin bit that we're actually trying to innovate with, and so therefore trying to identify within the AHSNs, how to get to the people who might be interested in making the system more efficient rather than making the patient care better. It is a bit of a challenge, because all of the programs that I've been looking at tend to revolve around innovation for a particular care scenario, rather than innovating how you deliver that healthcare.
Well, yes, I mean, I can see that there are obviously big clinical transformation programs that are going on following the long-term plan, which was introduced last year. So as you said, the diabetes, the mental health. But there is I think the thread that sort of weaves throughout all of that is the digital transformation agenda.
Right.
So that's whatever that needs to change within the health setting. It's very much around how is digital an enabler of that. And so, in addition to all of those very specific clinical themes that you've talked about, there is also sort of, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of informatics. There is a whole, army of staff out there whose responsibility it is to, introduce innovation and new solutions and new products in the informatics space. Yeah. So that's people, obviously, like your directors of informatics, your CIOs and CCIOs. So each of the CCGs and the hospital trusts will have one of those. We certainly sit on, so within Yorkshire and Humber, we've got 2 integrated care systems, and we've got 1 STP. So are you aware of what they are?
Yeah, I understand that terminology. Yeah.
We have a presence on the digital transformation boards in each of those regions. So we're very linked into the informatics, the senior informatics people, and also the chief information officers across the region. And so there'll be various different sort of fora and platforms and things going on where we're out and about in the field, and we always have our eyes and ears open, where somebody might say, I've got this issue, or I'm looking for a solution that meets this need. So there's potentially always the opportunity to broker those introductions, depending upon what the solution and the product is that you bring to us, essentially. So I completely understand what you're saying around this. This doesn't necessarily fit in a clinical category. It's it's overarching, as it were, but that's not necessarily a problem at all.
All right. Okay, good. Could I suggest then that we switch tracks for a minute and I just quickly walk you through? I've got about a dozen slides here just to explain what it is, how it works, set the scene for you, if you like. So the target for us is to actually try and, in essence, as we say, alert some of these buying influencers, exactly as you say, the CIOs, the CCIOs, etc., the innovation teams, to what we see as the benefits of using To Go. Now, To Go, from our experience, is best used in a proof of value setup. In other words, whenever we've gone into a situation where we're trying to say to people, this is what it does and this is how it does it, nothing is quite as effective as being able to give it to them, get it implemented, get it stood up and allow them to play with it, right? And that's effectively what our objective is in what we're trying to do through the AHSNs, is to identify effectively some demo systems, some things we can effectively connect our technology to, because we use parts of our system running on the Amazon Web System, AWS, then obviously we'd need to actually ensure we've got permission to host those demos. And then the bit that Western England are sort of focusing on at the moment, which is helping us to publicise this, how to get the right sort of terminology, is underway. And then obviously advice on the most strategic direction, how best to actually achieve this. And this is very much, as you're just saying, looking at do we communicate with the AHSNs and allow them to sort of try and find us solutions there? Do we need to get involved at a regional level with the innovation teams, with the ICSs and the STPs? Do we need to actually try and target, in your case, for example, one of the things that I was discussing with Nev in my email was getting to talk to Sheffield teaching hospitals about what they're trying to do for their 2020 digital plan and so on. So that's really where we feel we need people to help us to understand that. So so let's move on for a minute. If I can get it to move on. Come on, why is it not moving forward? Right, there we go. So let's have a look at a example, Sheffield Teaching Hospital implementation, right? So the first thing is that many of the systems that are actually in use in an example like Sheffield will have been built prior to the implementation of mobile technology. Yeah. So if you think about patient administration systems, to some extent even electronic patient records, they were designed effectively without thinking about, well, how do I use this actually on a mobile device rather than on a laptop or on a desktop. And quite often they were used, and I'll use the business intelligence, the sort of red server idea to talk about. They were using technologies that just won't work on mobiles. So, Flash, for example, just doesn't work on iPads and so on. Yeah. Doesn't work on iPhones. So that's the big challenge, is, that actually it's the underlying systems. And then the second challenge is there's lots and lots of systems. I mean, I was stunned by looking at the Sheffield information to see quite how many systems they have in just one teaching hospital. Yeah. But there's another more sort of challenging situation, and that is the time and the effort and the costs involved in actually being able to implement this mobile. So Gartner did a study that said, the demand for being able to use these things on mobiles is outstripping our ability to deliver it. Mm-hmm. And they also went on and looked, and this is a commercial one, they looked at a large organization and calculated they needed about 2,000 mobile apps to give full coverage of everything that they do in-house, but on mobile devices. Now, it isn't quite that bad, I think, from looking at Sheffield's example, but it's still an awful lot of mobile apps that would need to be implemented in order to give Sheffield complete mobility across all of their 5 tiers of systems. And so consequently, what we're all about is actually thinking about how to actually achieve that process. When you then add on that in order to create a mobile app in the first place, it takes on average 18 weeks and costs £250,000 in total development and thinking time and so on. You understand why it's a very, very costly exercise. So we looked at this by a completely different approach. What we actually said is, let's not develop mobile apps. Let's simply create the capability of the mobile device being used as a window in onto all of these other applications. And I refer to it often as a mobility layer. So if you think about it as a layer sitting on top of everything that's in use within the hospital and coping with one particular aspect alone, which is how to display this information on a remote mobile device, and how to be able to interact with the user in displaying that information. So a simple illustration, we have touch screens on our mobile devices. If I touch on a button on my mobile device, I want that to mean something to the application I'm actually talking to at that moment in time.
Yes.
And we focused our efforts on the user interface. The first thing we did is we said using Windows browsers will not work on mobile devices. They're just too heavy in terms of real estate. So we created our own user interface, and you'll see that in a bit more detail. That's what we mean by the dynamic navigation. But we also added in a number of things that we can do with mobile devices that you can't do, with desktops and things. So things like custom gestures, the ability for users to be able to just draw on the screen and have it go off and do things in the application. Things like being able to talk to the system. So we can actually operate voice recognition based data capture and data entry. And then in a commercial environment, we hit somebody who said, this is all very well, but my folks are used to pressing function keys and control keys and so on. Where are they on a mobile keyboard? And the answer is they don't exist. So we created the ability to have specialized keyboards. So you can flash up a keyboard that's just got the right keys for whatever the application is. So that's where we focused our attention. And we then realized that this was really an interesting approach because of the huge costs that are coming up on mobile development. It was actually a real barrier to organizations, and we think it is to the NHS, to actually really implement mobile properly. Particularly if you then look at what the underlying systems are. So if the underlying systems have been custom developed, or they've been modified, or they have third-party add-ons, then there's actually a significant effort involved in trying to actually make those available to users. And we looked at how our competitors were doing this. And although these are going to be commercial names that I'm talking about here, some of these are in use in the NHS. So the major vendors, and you could substitute, CSC Lorenzo for SAP, you could substitute EMIS for Oracle and so on. But fundamentally, the major vendors are building what we refer to as point-specific solutions. So they build many disconnected mobile applications in order to give the functionality that different groups of users need from their complex applications. The challenge is that you can't typically cross across those, so you can't run the entire system through their mobile device. You have to have lots and lots of little mobile apps. And then you come to the actual mobile app developers themselves, the development platforms, and they say, oh, well, it's very simple. All you need to do is start again. Rebuild everything, but you've got to do it our way. It's got to work the way we do it. And that means you've got to change your user interface and you've got to retrain your users, etc. But it's still point specific. And then finally, you look at the VDI suppliers, people like Citrix and VMware with their remote access capability, typically used more in a laptop environment than in a mobile environment. And that's because they're trying to force users to use the Windows browser paradigm. And it's very slow and it really doesn't work. And it doesn't give you the ability, for example, to use all of the screen real estate on a small mobile device like a smartphone, right? So those are where we saw the major issues, and the results are that users basically drop these very quickly. They struggle with them. They are expensive to deploy. They're not across the platform. So the thing for SAP, for example, would be completely different to if I did a Connie mobile app. I'd have to have lots and lots of mobile apps. So leading finally to the challenge of going mobile successfully, we also need to access and talk to people about all of the aspects of what they want from a mobile application. And I'm going to start with security. So it's got to be secure. I mean, quite clearly, the information the NHS are handling, is vitally important to actually maintain security. But you mentioned, getting a high ROI. So clearly, the finance folks would be interested in actually understanding what savings can be made and so on. One of the key savings is the fact you don't actually need to cut any code at all. So
right.
there's no coding. There's effectively very, very limited implementation in here. And as I commented right at the beginning, users, and I've used the term nurses here for users, but users would find this very familiar, because actually what they see on their smart device is exactly what they were used to on the ward desktop. And then finally, for clinicians, it's actually the sum of all that, if you like. It's actually getting the whole thing to work more efficiently.
Yes.
Yeah, and so fundamentally what we then did is we sat down, scratched our heads and said, well, we think there is a different way to do this. And the solution we came up with is this technology that we call To Go. And what To Go enables us to do is for an individual user to use their mobile device as a window in on all of these applications. And this is in essence how we do it. So we've developed 4 pieces of software. The blue box you can see in the middle of your screen labeled To Go is what we refer to as the To Go server. Mm-hmm. And what that is doing is that is connecting to all of the underlying applications that are in use in this hospital. So we have a connection process, if you like, that enables us to connect to Lorenzo and connect to EMIS and connect to all these various applications, and effectively handle the communication between the device and the application. So the device then becomes the ability for a user to be able to say, first of all, I need to be able to get into this system. No device can access the system until it's validated. So it's security at one level. But then secondly, what the user then actually is authenticated through the system, through the standard authentication process. And then all of the actual work, the communication, if you like, is done on their behalf by our To Go server, talking to their electronic patient record system, for example, to go and find the information that is required for this particular patient. What then happens is the To Go server switches process and is taking that information from that remote system, effectively taking a stream of pixels from that information, encrypting it and sending it back to the device, where it is then decrypted on the device and is displayed on the screen.
I'm with you, yeah.
Yeah, so we're not moving any data. All the data stays effectively on the servers. There's absolutely no data stored on the device. So if you lose the device, it's completely secure because there's absolutely nothing on there, except for the ability, if you like, to handle this encryption decryption process. And then what we're into then is, what's the user want to do with this information? And I'm just going to walk you very quickly through an example of the interface, right? So here is our interface here. We have this simple slide in, pop in and out navigation bar. I won't bother to explain all of the symbols here for a minute, but let's assume that we actually touch the applications icon on here. And what we then get is we get a series of icon-driven choices. So this particular user has the ability to go and pick from a variety of applications that they can actually work with. They happen to choose this application called ClickView. They tapped on the ClickView symbol, What has then happened is because they've touched the click view symbol, the to-go server has actually gone off to the click view server and implemented a new session for them, and now present to them effectively all of ClickView working on that server, but effectively screened through their mobile device. So all these tabs you can see for the months, for the various tabs at the top, transactions, exchange rates and so on, these are all live effectively on that mobile device, because if the user touches, for example, a different year, we work out which part of the screen they've effectively touched. The to-go server then translate that into a signal back to the ClickView server that says they just touched this 2009 button. So pivot the data, redisplay the information within the server, and then the to-go server kicks in with its final task, which is it's got an intelligent algorithm in there that actually does the delta of what did it look like before I told them to do this, and what does it look like now. It strips out only the pixels on the screen that need to be modified, packages those up, squirts those back to the device with an instruction to redraw the screen. So what you get is very quick, low latency updates on that remote screen once the user's made a choice. However, beyond that, the user might say, well, yeah, that's fine, but actually I need to remember I've got to go back and quickly do something. So they've gone back to swipe the menu in and touch the favorites option. And here we can see a series of thumbnail snapshots of things that the user's been working on already today. And by touching the top one, what they're actually doing is sending an instruction to say, freeze my session in ClickView, open my session in the dashboard, and put me back exactly where I was when I froze the session in the dashboard. Right. And so we've got this idea that one user can have access to multiple applications, depending on their role and their rights, of course. And each of those applications can effectively be running independently on different servers in different sessions, all handled within the to-go environment. That's what to-go actually does, is it effectively says, we'll give you mobile everything.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's our challenge is, genuinely we can implement this very, very quickly because we have this, what we call a configuration library. And as soon as we've seen, for example, one implementation of Lorenzo, then any other implementation of Lorenzo is immediately available to users through the to-go system. And that's where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the point where we can actually stand up a demonstration, a demo that says, look at this, I can connect, here's how we've connected, this is how long it's taken to connect, go and use this application, and you'll see that what you've actually got is full mobile access, for example, to Lorenzo. And I only use Lorenzo because we spent months and months and months talking to the CSC team about Lorenzo before they decided they wanted to go off and build their own mobile. So it's a bit of a sore point with us. But, so anyway, that's what we do.
So that's really impressive, and I'm just cogitating on what so the potential of this, and to think about the application of it in a real world setting. So in terms of the conversations that you've had to date with Louise and Nigel et al, and you said you're on the journey to sort of articulating your value proposition to the NHS.
Yes.
Have you had thoughts or conversations around where, in the first instance, so when the doors sort of start to open, I know, for example, with Suffolk, the types of settings where you might want to look to see this tested in the first instance?
Yes. Yeah, we have a little bit of that, in the sense that it's my impression, I've not sort of discussed this in detail with Charles, but it's my impression that this has more application in secondary rather than primary care.
Yes.
And that's simply because I see a hospital and everything that is involved in an acute hospital as being and I'm sure my local GP will forgive me for this, but much, much more complex than a GP surgery and the systems necessary to support primary care. So secondary care, I think, is our sweet spot. That's actually where we see the biggest problem as being. Then within that, where do we actually focus on? Well, one of the hints we were given, which was by Hugh Hathaway, was why don't you go and have a look at ward rounds? Because ward rounds as a process are very time consuming, not particularly joined up. In many instances, what it's led to is a demand for more IT infrastructure because you can't stand in a queue waiting to get access to the ward desktop. So there's a proliferation of that starting to happen. And yet this solution potentially would enable every nurse on duty to be able to actually access whatever applications they need. And for example, to be able to actually capture notes, at the bedside. And they could capture notes at the bedside either through gestures or through typing or through special keyboard, or if the situation were appropriate, by voice capture. Now, voice capture obviously is a little more difficult to deal with because a lot of the information again is confidential. But I think if you take on board the fact that what we're actually trying to do is to effectively extend that system to wherever the user is, you'll get an idea of what we're talking about. Yes. I personally believe that we can actually show a really significant saving of time in just that one area, in just ward rounds. We don't know enough about how the NHS works, if you like, to find that there might be something completely different that's actually a much bigger saving in time and effort because it's all done on paper, for example, that we could mobilise. But that's my thoughts.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So ward rounds, so obviously that's a sort of on a one-to-one healthcare professional to patient interaction. To negate the need, as you say, for the hard copy paper, and then to sit and having to sit at that what will be an ancient ward computer and type up. So there's definitely something there. And I don't know. I'm just thinking about potentially in community services as well. So if you're out visiting somebody in their own home, you might be a pediatric community nurse or a district nurse. And again, I'm just thinking out loud here around if you might want to know, are there any spare beds because I need to admit this elderly person quickly, or thinking about it the other way. So in terms of discharge, so if we think about where the whole drive for tech's going in the future, with health and social care being integrated, because my next question is going to be around social care as well as health. If you're needing to discharge somebody to, and that could be a mental health patient, it could be a dementia patient to a care home, and you need to know where the spaces are, where the beds are, where the patient transport is as well. You can see how at a sort of a systems level this is potentially could be realised, because you've got all of those disparate sources of data sitting in different systems, as you've said, that all need to come together. And so I could see this is tailored very much at the by a settings-based approach, but also by the type of healthcare professional who happens to be using it on that given day. So it's very much, for me, it's a workforce enabler type of solution.
Yeah, it is, and I think if you actually understand one other aspect for a minute, Helen, which is it's actually driven by who's using the device. It's not driven. It's not driven by the device. So I can hand you my iPad, for example, and you can log into my iPad, and your profile will give you access to lots of applications that I don't have access to, and equally you won't be able to access some of the things I can access, and so on. So it's actually really, really flexible down to the level of the fact that you could actually be, as you say, running in a situation where you're trying to establish bed availability. But it could well be that for me, I only see beds in a particular series of wards, and you see them across the whole of the trust. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So every individual user has a profile within the system that will actually determine their access levels and their visibility and so on.
Yeah. Okay. That makes absolute sense. So I mean, the potential range of applications here is enormous, really. I think.
It is.
So in terms of, just conscious of time, in terms of practicable next steps, so you're obviously in the process of writing up your value proposition and your elevator pitch, as it were.
Yep.
Can we reconvene in a short space of time so that I can have a look at your thinking around that? And in the meantime, go away and have a talk with some of my colleagues, particularly around the Sheffield region, around where we might be able to broker some introductions. I think that in terms of where you are on the journey, I think there is support that's needed still to get that, to talk at it and how it might be utilised with specific examples from a hospital future setting. So we'd almost want to do some to build on the value proposition, to talk about some potential options for applications at a settings-based approach or at a healthcare professional. So from a workforce perspective. Yep. So I don't know, is it helpful if we sort of reconvene to help you through that thinking?
It would. What I would like to propose, Helen, is why don't I send you a couple of documents that I'm working on at the moment, all right?
Yes.
And that will give you the opportunity to actually see where we're starting from.
Yeah.
And that may well be helpful in both instances, if you like, of you being able to say, well, don't bother with this document, or, expand this in a different way or whatever. That would be very, very useful, because right now, as I've given the examples to Charles now, I'm weighed down by the jargon of acronyms in the NHS. And wading our way through all this to try and actually understand which might have some relevance. So we have documentation, but it's all commercially aimed. So there's a couple of documents in there that I'm working on that I think may well be capable of getting our message across to the NHS, and I'm happy to share those with you immediately. And as you say, reconvene a conversation about how we move those.
Yes, so if you're happy to send me something through, and I'll have a read of it and a bit of a reflect, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and talk to Tracy, who is my equivalent, but she's our workforce transformation lead, just to socialise this with her confidentially.
Okay.
Looking at it from a slightly different perspective, she might think, actually, I can see a really strong potential first stage sort of trial here with a particular group of healthcare professionals, as it were. Looking at it through the lens of how would it help me as a HCP, healthcare professional. Yep. So there's that, and then there's the more, for me, there's the more sort of, so that's the sort of the tailored bit, and then, but for me, there's also the potential then to do the more sort of high level general introduction to some of the right people within the healthcare economy, i.e. the informatics people and the CIOs, who may then well think, well, actually within my hospital at the moment, we've got this particular issue, and I can see the potential for it to be utilised in this way. So I think there's a very tailored workforce lens that we can apply to this, but also keep it more high level as well, depending upon the types of conversations that we broker in the first instance. But I would really love to see anything that you've collated thus far in terms of how you tell that story, framed by the NHS. I'll have a look at it. I can comment and review, and also potentially just point you in the direction of some useful documents in terms of some of the regional workforce strategies that are happening at the moment, some of our regional digital transformation plans, which again, it's framing things in that language a little bit. So anything that we can do like that and beyond to help. And then I think if we reconvene and then think about maybe doing some targeted stakeholder engagement.
Okay. Would it help for me to actually share this presentation slide deck with you?
I think it's great, and it's very, very succinct, and it tells exactly what it is that you're offering in a very in a very good way, if I can put it like that, because that's talked me through it, and I've now got it in my mind as to exactly what it is.
Okay.
It feels very tangible now.
Right.
Helen,
can I ask you?
Actually, on the website.
Yeah, sorry, Charles. Can I just pick up on one aspect for a minute with Helen? Helen, because of the size of the slide deck, what I'd prefer to do is to actually give you access to a Dropbox folder that you can download it from rather than email it. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I think we are, unless you can zip it. If not, then Dropbox.
No. The issue is, even with zipping it, it's probably not going to go through your mail server.
Okay,
whereas if you're happy to, appropriately download it from a Dropbox folder link, then that's the easy way. We already have an NHS Dropbox folder set up for just this purpose, to be able to actually put documentations and put presentations and things up there for you to download. So we'll send you the link for that.
That's lovely. All right, brilliant. That's really helpful.
Sorry, Charles, I interrupted you.
Sorry, Charles.
I'm just saying that on the website, as well as the Dropbox, there are some explainer videos and PDFs, but we'll send you relevant information via Dropbox. Okay,
that's great. So I'll have a look at that. I'll have a review of the sort of the value proposition, as it were, that you've written thus far. I'll come back to you with any specific points, or do some signposting to any sort of policy and strategy drivers that I think it might be helpful to sort of reference that language, or some of the outcome, the high level outcomes that the whole of the NHS are working towards. And then we'll look to do a follow-up video call, and I'll reach out to my colleagues to think about, pick people's brains essentially around where might it be a good starting point to open up some conversations with some of the relevant IT or workforce leads out in the region. Is that okay?
That is absolutely excellent, Helen. Thank you very much indeed for offering to do that. That is most useful to us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're keen to kind of keep close to this and help you where we can. I think it's just really helpful for me to, as I say, share that document. Let me have a read and a reflect.
Sure.
I'll have a chat with Neb as well and say that we've spoken, and then we'll see how we can best socialise this in a structured way and do some stakeholder engagement with you.
Excellent. Well, many thanks indeed for your time, and it sounds from your enthusiasm, Helen, so thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, that's really helpful. It's great to meet you, and I look forward to receiving the documents, and we'll be in touch soon. Okay.
Right. Okay, thanks for your time.
Goodbye.
All right, all the best. Take care.
Bye.